So you want to know how to finish a 3D printed BJD? I'll tell you. Hey there, welcome to the Teeny Tinkers channel. I make ball jointed doll and craft related content. And you're here because I'm going to teach you how to finish a teeny tini's 3D printed kit, or really any 3D printed ball jointed doll that you might want to finish. I have Flora here and Gail, of course, and I'm going to be finishing their prints as part of the Teeny Tinies video from last week. You're going to need some sanding sponges, a melamine sponge, a respirator, or at the very least a mask, and a craft knife for the sanding stage. I like to use sanding sponges because wet sanding produces a lot less dust, and it's much easier to clean up in my opinion. This is why you need the craft knife. While I do remove most of the supports for you, sometimes they can hide in little corners or there can be little nubs left, and you might need to pick those off or just get them down, which is easier than sanding them all completely down in the first place. Then, starting with the heaviest grit of sandpaper, you're going to start sanding everything, and I like to do them all at the same time, so I'll do all the pieces with the heaviest grit of sandpaper, then I'll put them to the side and switch to the lighter grits, moving down the grits. My prints don't have a ton of lines anyways, so you really don't need to sand too hard, so don't worry about it taking eons and eons and eons. As I work through each piece, I double check to make sure that it is completely smooth and beautiful and doesn't have any chips or anything. But also, please, while you're sanding, be sure to not put too much force on the edges. These dolls are very small, and while I've made them pretty sturdy, you can still break pieces off if you press too hard. Also, while you're sanding, if you have any flat or really rounded pieces to sand, definitely lay the sponge down and then just rub the piece over top of it. This is way easier and less crampy on your hands. Just a tip I've learned and picked up along the way. Also, be sure to wring out your sponges regularly so that the stuff doesn't get all gooked and caked up on there and make the sandpaper, or sanding sponge rather, less effective. Okay, all the pieces are rough sanded, so now I'm going to do a test fit and put all the pieces together to make sure everything's fitting. You see how this knee doesn't really want to go in? So while it should hypothetically always fit, some resins absorb more water or bloat a little more than others, which can cause a little bit of tightness in joints. What you want to do if this happens to your kit or your doll is just to lightly sand the actual joint. Try and keep it round, but you should really only have to take off a hair of resin for it to fit beautifully. Also, when you're test fitting your pieces, make sure you're test fitting them to the right side. If you sand off too much while trying to make the wrong joint fit into the wrong socket, you're going to end up making your doll not a very good poser and make things maybe have gaps and stuff, which you absolutely do not want. I also recommend doing the test fitting after your first grit of sandpaper because that's going to be the easiest grit to fix any joint fitting mistakes or issues. Okay, so I'm going to give them all a quick rinse before moving on to the next stage. And I'm just rinsing them in regular old water. Doesn't really matter, you don't need to use any soaps or anything for this. I use a piece of paper towel and just quick dab dry them. We're not quite finished, but you can kind of see at this point what they're looking like. This is where the melamine sponge or magic eraser comes in. This is really a micro sanding or a polishing tool. That's also why it's so good at cleaning, just as an FYI. But this should smooth out any extra edges you have that might still have lines or still be a little bit scratchy looking. So if you've ordered one of my kits before, you know I do not include the sanding sponges, but I will link them below. I do, however, include one magic eraser with every single kit. Okay, these pieces are going to get pushed to the side so I just wanted to show you as an example how it would look if you sanded it only with the magic eraser. And I mean, the long story short of it is they still look pretty good. As I mentioned, these kits are pretty smooth initially, so they really don't require a lot of work. The places I tend to focus on the most when I'm sanding, especially on the face, is going to be right over the forehead and then right under the eyes. And also, I just wanted to say and take a minute, if you have not liked or subscribed, now is a great time to do so. It really helps the channel out, and 70% of the people who watch my videos are not subscribed, so it would be really cool if you joined the family. And are we a family? I don't know. If you joined the channel and hung out with us on the regular. Make sure to also check inside the joints for any support remnants as well. Okay, so here are the two different dolls that I've sanded, one with sanding sponges and one with just the magic eraser. Honestly, they look pretty comparable, but that's partly in part because the peach resin was so beautiful. Then I recommend using a microfiber cloth or paper towel if you don't have one, but the microfiber is better. And just go ahead and rub all of the extra dust and anything else that might be stuck to your doll off the pieces. The microfiber will grab onto basically all the dust and take it with it. Honestly, I love these things. They're basically for car detailing. You can get them at pretty much any auto shop. So here's a comparison of the two pieces. The green does have a couple shiny spots, and that is just because of the type of resin that was used. But in general, they do look pretty comparable. All right, let's move on to the next stage, which is, of course, stringing. Everybody's favorite thing to do. For materials, we're going to need a couple sizes of elastic, sewing needle and a thread, which you don't always need but can be helpful, a pair of scissors, and I personally like to have a pair of these hemostats, or like clamps, on the side. Let's string up Flora first. I'm going to lay the pieces out in the right order on the right sides because there's absolutely nothing worse than getting to the end of stringing a doll, looking down and realizing you've switched the calves. It sucks. You don't want to do that. The hips have a second notch at the top facing the inside. For this body, the thighs have an indent on the inside of the thighs, and the knees have markings that almost look like smiley faces on them, so you want the smiley face to be right side up. Finally, the calves should bump out on the outside of the leg. All right, let's give that one more little test fit, and it should almost hold like this. Looking good. On the arms, you want both of the rounded out parts with the higher ends to be facing front, and you also need the balls to be facing in. I also string the upper bodies first, always, and that's because it's easier to get that elastic and needle through to the other side without the leg elastics coming up. So if you're having a hard time getting everything strung, you can take a needle and a thread, and I just simply string up the needle and pull it through one end of the thread and tie it off in a knot or two. Then you can use the needle to easily slide all of the pieces through. And honestly, I do this just because it's faster and easier, but if you don't have a needle and thread, you really don't need them. Once one arm is strung up, I take one side of the elastic, which I keep a little bit longer, and I pull it down through the entire other arm, pull it up, and this is where I like to use the clamp hemostat things, and I clamp it, and then I go back up the arm. By clamping it, I'm ensuring I'm keeping tension in the arm and it's not going to be too slack. It can be really hard to tighten it once you've pulled it back up through the arm, so this is much, much easier. If you have a pair of these, I do recommend using them. If you do not have a pair of these, I will link some down below from Amazon that you can check out. Okay, upper body is strung up. Now we're going to do the same thing on the legs. If you have S-hooks, you can use tiny S-hooks here, but I have sculpted these in mind with the fact that they don't have S-hooks, meaning you're able to just loop the elastic around the bars. However, this means removing hands and feet is not super optional unless you want to take your whole doll apart. But if you would like, you can make S-hooks this tiny out of armature wire or anything like that. I string up both legs separately, number one, because it's easier at the scale, and number two, because it's easier at the scale. Then I pull both sets of strings up into the tummy piece and tie them off into a triple knot. Once that's done, I pull them up through the chest and it's time to grab the S-hooks. I personally prefer to pull the elastics up through the head, tie it off, and then add my S-hook. But if you don't have the hemostats, that's going to be very difficult. So you can use a chopstick or something else to hold your string while you tie off the knot and then loop the S-hook through. But there we are, she is strung. Now let's add her magnets. To add the magnets, I recommend using really any super glue. I have this one right now, but I do actually prefer Gorilla Glue for how fast it dries. Tip for gluing magnets is put a tiny little bit of water into each magnet well, and then add the glue drops in. Then you can add your magnets in as well. I super duper recommend only putting magnets on one side at a time and letting them fully dry before you try and add the other ones. This way you can double and triple check that your magnets are facing the right way, so you don't accidentally glue one on backwards. When they get glued on backwards, it's honestly super annoying and can be a pain to get out to fix. Also, I wanted to add a quick note that as well as 3 magnets, the Floras that are available for sale also have a couple of pegs to add just a little bit of extra strength so that the faceplate doesn't fall off. The flowers are a little bit heavy after all. But that's all there is to it. At this point, your BJD, your teeny tiny, is ready to customize, and that really shouldn't take too long at all. I asked some previous customers who don't necessarily string and finish dolls nearly as often as I do how long it took them to assemble their teeny tiny kit, and the average answer was about an hour and a half. So if you've got 90 minutes, it's a really fun little project. Heck, you can even watch a couple of my videos while you do it. If you have any questions that I haven't covered here, please feel free to ask them in the comments, and I or somebody else will be very happy to help you. Otherwise, if you're already subscribed, thanks so much for subscribing. And if you're new here, I hope you like the content and consider subscribing. As always, I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye!